Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back in Tucson, one of my favorite places. And since I became an administrator in January, I feel like it's really hard to escape. And really happy to present on sort of an open-ended topic here, because it's what I'm going to do isn't traditional archaeology. It's not even really science. It's just delving a little bit and just sharing with you all some of the things that I've observed working with a lot of Hopi artists in a museum setting and in cultural preservation kinds of contexts, and getting to know contemporary artists. And what always strikes me is how interested they are in archaeology, and especially in imagery. And I think that's because of some aspects of Hopi culture that involve clan migrations and the naming of clans, and the way kachinas in Hopi culture, that's the English pronunciation. I'll slip back and forth between Katsina, which is the Hopi word, and Kachina, which has become English. And those are spirit beings that have to do with the clouds and rain and ancestors and the dead. And you're probably familiar with them. It's hard to miss them all over Arizona. And they're the personifications of forces of nature and plants and animals and even moral principles and other tribes and all kinds of things. So Hopi has a strong tradition of making imagery about ideas and layers and depths of meaning in all of their artwork, as well as poetry and songs and oral traditions and things like that. So I'm more interested really in contemporary art and how artists are interested in archaeology and in the past, and how their artwork serves to materialize connections between the past and the present, and then also, of course, going forward into the future. So we'll see if this will work. So you've probably already heard this story, so I'll just tell it again just in case. Anybody recognize Nampeo? So she was a potter on First Mesa, and she's Hopi Tewa, so her first language was Tewa. And the Tewa today, in Anthropology 101, here you learn that they live along the Rio Grande. But a bunch of Tewa people migrated to Hopi in the early 1700s to escape the reconquest by the Spaniards. So, and even before that, starting right after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, and when you really get into the archaeology and the clan migration stories, it looks like there's a lot of back and forth for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we don't just blame it on the Spaniards. There was a lot of mobility in the time period that I'll mostly be talking about, of the 1400s and on up. So she's a descendant of both Hopi and Tewa people, but the Tewa became matrilineal when they became part of the Hopi community. And the Hopi inherit their clan traditions from their mother. So you see her here in a traditional Hopi hand-woven woolen dress, and she's painting some pottery. And this is one of her pieces right here. And when she started making pottery, she was making pottery like other Hopi and Hopi Tewa potters made. It looked a lot like Zuni pottery, and I'll show you one as we go along. They were using the same style. And again, in the 1800s, there's so much movement back and forth. They're sharing designs and sharing styles. But Nampeo had a husband who was working with archaeologists, and one of them was Jesse Walter Fuchs from the Smithsonian. And before that, her husband Lezu was working with Thomas Keam, who was the first trader up there in the First Mesa area. So Thomas Keam was selling Hopi artifacts on the market, especially after the railroad came through. And one of the things that he found he could sell was pottery, especially ancient pottery that people would excavate in this area of the eastern side of the Hopi reservation. So she saw older pots coming out of the ground. She saw potsherds on the ground, of course, as everyone does up there. You can't miss them. But once the archaeologists started digging this up, and the trader starts hiring people to dig up pots, and you're seeing whole designs, she takes off with this design, style that's called the Sikyatki Revival. So Sikyatki is one of the sites that dates to the 1400s in the First Mesa area that Fuchs and the Smithsonian were excavating. So there's really the whole message of my talk, is that this is something that Hopi artists and Hopi Tewa artists do. They take pieces of the past and reinterpret them and make them their own and market them. And this is a relationship that, it's tempting to just dismiss this as commercialization or commodification or all of these highfalutin words that we use, but it's more than that. It's an outreach to the outer world, where they're trying to explain Hopi culture to the outside world at the same time that they're trying to understand what's going on in Anglo-American society. And this is a time when things are changing very rapidly for everybody in this country. So this is a piece by Nampeyo's daughter, Fanny Nampeyo. And this particular design has become iconic for the Nampeyo family. And it's not just going back to Sikyatki, the 1400s site. This design goes back even further in the archaeological record, and it just gets reinterpreted over and over again. And it's partly, well, it's just a gorgeous design, right? But it's been called an eagle wing or eagle claw design, and eagles are very important in Hopi culture. But it's become encoded in the art world as the migration design. And one of the things I want to show you about this is the way these rotate around an axis here. There's motion, and it's a circular motion that repeats. So this is called rotational symmetry, and this is very, very important in Hopi art in almost all time periods, going back really far. So this piece is probably from around 1050, 1070 AD, from the Hopi area or the Kayenta culture area. And there's that design. It has these wing tail elements. And the hatcher, which some Hopi potters today say that represents water running through the fields. And it can mean a whole lot of things. So from the top, we've got a circular motion here, and then within that band, you have rotation. So this has come to refer to migration and the migration of what became Hopi clans from all over the Southwest as far as Mesoamerica. And I'm hearing a lot of people in the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office saying, we came up the coast of South America and reed boats and then walked up here. And it's really very extensive. Serpent Mound in Ohio has caught the attention of Snake Clan Hopi members. So they have a way of pulling in the world to their center place, and I think the art is very central in that. Now, Nampeyo never signed her pots. They all had round bottoms, the traditional way, and then by Fanny's generation, the daughter's generation, they're clearly making them for the art market. So the bottom is flat so that you can set it on a shelf. And they're signed because by this time in the 1930s, say, the Nampeyo name has become very famous, and Keem and others were very careful to try to sell the name of the famous artist and their families. So let's go back to the 1200s with the pot here, and then most of you in this area will recognize the Tonto shirt, right, from the Arizona State Museum. Ask Art over there if you have more questions about this. And this is a weft wrap, open weave, sprang kind of, this open technique of weaving that comes up from Mesoamerica at some time in probably, I don't know, the 1100s. And ask Dale about cotton. She did her dissertation on Hopis and cotton. Master's thesis. But it read like a dissertation. It was very good. Very, very good and very detailed. So cotton was very important in Hopi culture, and this is all the way down in central Arizona, and these techniques go way, way down into Mesoamerica, and so do these designs. So you'll probably recognize this kind of busy, interlocking, wrapping, rotational design from Hohokam pottery, and this is Little Colorado whiteware from just south of Hopi in the 1200s. And when I see designs like this, I'm really thinking cotton textiles. and the fact that they're using it on the black and white pottery and not the red pottery. You can read about what I think about that in an issue of Archaeology Southwest that I'm sure you've all gotten on the Kayenta area. So in brief, I'm associating cotton and the black and white pottery with water and clouds. And this is before we see Kachina imagery, but these ideas are already there about the importance of clouds and water. And this, again, is very similar to the textile designs from central Arizona and on down to into Mexico. And Donna can probably tell you about petroglyphs in Chihuahua and Sonora that look just like this as well. Very widespread. Little Colorado whiteware, again, walnut black on white for those who like a label on it. And that rotational symmetry is just the same as Nampeyo was using later on. Then this style of textiles, this is a brocade technique. So you're weaving and you're laying in colored threads as you weave. And Hopi men still do this. This technique comes in sometime in the 1300s or 1400s. And we're going to see this on pottery as early as the 1200s as well. So this was made just a few years ago by a young Hopi weaver who's just picking it up, learning from the few old men who are still doing this. And now there's something like 40 young men learning to weave and making weavings. And you can see them at the M&A Hopi show, and we try to reward that. So this has a negative kind of design with the raw cotton showing through that brocade. And the dragonfly is an image that starts to show up in about the 1300s and continues right through. And you could still paint dragonflies even when the Spaniards were around oppressing you for painting katsinas, because you just say, oh, it's a cross. Okay, so this is from the late 1200s, Kayenta black on white. Jeff's nodding. This is one of the really distinctive designs that you can use to trace Kayenta migration and just see how it fits that brocade technique. You've got this structure of the wefts going across here, and they're showing you in this style the wefts and then the colored threads that were woven in as almost I think it is called a float. So again, cotton textiles going with the black on white pottery in that period. So that's a time period that people look back to. And then here's the same Nampeyo bowl. Again, we'll talk about Sikyatki style. So Nampeyo would have done this around 1900. And you've got your bird feather elements. Now I'm not seeing the little red dot. There it is. It's just a really tiny red dot. So eagle feather elements here, and just this sweeping spiral. So we go from all of that tight interlocking, but nonetheless rotational stuff in the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, very consistent, but getting more and more elaborate, to suddenly in the late 1300s and 1400s, this very asymmetric sweeping style with a lot of spiraling, and we get some color changes, and that's what Nampeyo was keying into. So this would be around the same time as Homolovi. This is coal-fired Hopi yellowware pottery made on the Hopi mesas, but then traded in large numbers down to Homolovi. And I just mentioned that because that's a state park, and the project that I worked on when I was a graduate student, and I think you've got an issue of Archaeology Southwest on that as well that's outside for you to pick up if you haven't seen that. So this is the kind of pottery that we were finding at Homolovi when I started getting interested in this stuff. So you've got your interlocking spirals here, but now they're using a bifold symmetry on the whole thing, and a kind of a two-axis reflection symmetry. So they're getting more complicated and more varied in the way they're arranging these elements. But you've still got elements here that Hopis today will interpret as water running through the fields and clouds. And I'm not saying that's what they meant to the people in the 1300s. I'm just saying that when Hopi people look at this today, they say, yeah, that's ours. So does Acoma, frankly, when they see this design. They say, yeah, that's ours. And they're both right. because there was so much movement back and forth, still is, frankly, lots of intermarriage.